Good morning, everyone. Today we are going to discuss Unit 2, that is Chapter 1. So, first of all, today's topic is the paradox of induction. Paradox of induction, already we have studied that what is induction and what are the two factors, that is the principle of the uniformity of nature and the law of causation, already studied. Now, what is paradox of induction? So, before we going to the main topics, that is paradox, some other related questions, that is the famous logician J.S. Mill studied. J.S. Mill have very contradictory statement regarding the induction. So, before going to the main topics, that is the principle of the uniformity of nature, is the Mill's contradictory statement that in induction there is a paradox. So, now paradox means induction, the ground of induction is itself the result of induction. So, this contradictory statement given by famous logician J.S. Mill. So, Mill's contradictory statement regarding the principle of the uniformity of nature is known as the paradox of induction. It simply means the ground of induction is itself the result of induction. Whether the principle of the uniformity of nature is an assumption, a postulate of induction, yet in another occasion he says the principle of the uniformity of nature is the result of unscientific induction or induction par simple enumeration. That is, for example, we can say that Mill calls it a fundamental principle or general axiom of induction and an assumption implied in every case of induction. For example, we can say that is Ram is mortal, Sham is mortal, Jadu is mortal, therefore all men are mortal. This argument, that is Ram is mortal, Sham is mortal, Jadu is mortal, on the basis of this experience we can establish a general real proposition, that is all men are mortal. So, on the basis of this mortality, that is some people of mortality, we can establish a general real proposition, that is all men are mortal. So, on the basis of this experience, a general real proposition all men are mortal is inferred from these propositions or these experience. Now, though Mill regards the principle of the uniformity of nature as an assumption or a postulate of induction, yet in another occasion J.S. Mill says the principle of the uniformity of nature is the result of unscientific induction or induction par simple enumeration. Now, already we have studied what is unscientific induction. Then now, what is the basis of unscientific induction? Or unscientific induction is based on mere uncontradicted experience. So uncontradicted experience is the ground of unscientific induction. Now what is the ground of unscientific induction? That means mere uncontradicted. So now without causal connection, unscientific induction aims at establishing the conclusion. So the conclusion of unscientific induction is always probable. Now one thing keep in mind that all the happenings in the world, all the incidents happening in the world are dependent on our experience. On our experience, we can see our experience that the sun rises in the east and sun sets in the west. These type of experiences, that means depending on these experiences or this type of experiences, we can establish the principle of uniformity of nature. On the basis of these type of experiences, we can establish the principle of the uniformity of nature. So now according to J.S. Mill, the principle of the uniformity of nature is the result of uncontradicted experience, and observing this type of assumptions, this type of uncontradicted experience, we can say that nature is uniform in every respect. This type, or on the basis of these type of experiences, we can say that nature is uniform in every respect. Now, by observing a large number of particular instances, that is Ram is mortal, Sham is mortal, Jadu is mortal, these type of experiences or particular instances, and finding no contradictory instances, we establish a general proposition that means all men are mortal. We have not come across a single crow that is of any other color except black. So in this type of experiences, for example, all crows are black. This is an example of unscientific induction. So unscientific induction is the basis of mere uncontradicted experience. In this example, we can see that there is no crows without black or any other color crows. We have never seen that the crow is white, crow is yellow, but we have seen by observing a large number of particular instances, then we can conclude that all crows are black, and then we have established a general real proposition, that is all crows are black. So we have found that is all of them are black. So we have not come across a single crow of any other color except black. So we can establish a general real proposition, or we can conclude that all crows are black. All crows are black. All crows are black. So our experience about the black crows remain uncontradicted. So in this regard, the principle of the uniformity of nature is based on the uncontradicted or unscientific induction based on, or it is simple induction par simple enumeration. Now all crows are black, so experience gives us instances of particular uniformities. Particular uniformities, from we establish a general uniformity. General uniformity, that is all crows are black. This is the general uniformity, all are black. So this uniformity, on the basis of these, we can establish the principle of the uniformity of nature. So all crows are black is an example of uncontradicted experience. Thus, the law of the uniformity of nature is established. That means mere uncontradicted experience or mere uniformities, or particular uniformities, we can establish a general real proposition on the basis of the law of uniformity of nature is established. When the general principle of the uniformity of nature is established, it forms the foundation of all inductions. When the principle of the uniformity of nature is established, it forms the foundation of all inductions. So, the ground of induction itself a result of induction. Regarding the principle of the uniformity of nature, the two statements made by J.S. Mill are contradictory to each other. So, these two statements, that is, once he says the law of the ground, law of this law, that is the principle of the uniformity of nature, is the ground of induction. Again, he says it cannot be derived from our experience. That means it is postulate, it is axiom, it is an assumption, it is an postulate of induction. Again, we must accept this law as the ground of induction. On another occasion, that is, on the other hand, J.S. Mill says the law of the uniformity of nature is derived from experience. So, in this contradictory statement, that is regarding the principle of the uniformity of nature, there are two ways, there are two statements regarding the principle of the uniformity of nature given by J.S. Mill. This contradictory statement, these two statements are in a paradoxical mood. So, this paradox of induction means the ground of induction is itself is the result of induction. So, now it's an important criticism here. So, now there are some criticism regarding the paradox of induction. So, Mill's view about the principle of the uniformity of nature is not acceptable in general. So, not acceptable, that means it has some criticism also. So, first, number one, that according to Mill, the principle of the uniformity of nature is an assumption implied in every case of induction. It is impossible to establish a general real proposition without the help of this law. That means there are two laws, the principle of the uniformity of nature and the law of causation. Without these two laws, the principle of the uniformity of nature is an assumption implied in every case. That means without this law, we can't establish a general real proposition. So, again, the principle of the uniformity of nature is said to be the result of unscientific induction or induction per simple enumeration. But the same law cannot be the ground or also a result at the same time, because once he says that it is the result, induction is result, induction, ground of induction is itself is the result of induction, and again it is once another hand J.S. Mill says that it is the ground of induction. So, at the same time there are two parallel statements regarding the principle of the uniformity of nature can't accept. So, here Mill commits a simple logical fallacy, that is, which is known as the fallacy of arguing in a circle, or the fallacy of arguing in a circle, or the fallacy of petitio principii. So, Mill commits a simple logical fallacy. This fallacy is known as the arguing in a circle or it may called, or it can, we can say that this fallacy is called the fallacy of Praeticcio Principii. This is the number one. Then number two criticism. Number two, Mill, according to Mill, the law of uniformity of nature is the ground of unscientific induction, but the conclusion of unscientific induction is always probable. You know that the conclusion of unscientific induction is always probable, not certain. So in this case, if the conclusion is probable, the ground of induction is also probable automatically. Again, according to Mill, the law of uniformity of nature is also the ground of scientific induction, and the conclusion of scientific induction is always certain, not probable. So Mill is compelled to admit that we can get certainty out of probability, but this is absurd. The principle of the uniformity of nature cannot be the result of induction, because you know here one thing is clear, that the conclusion of unscientific induction is always probable, but the conclusion of scientific induction is always certain. So at the same time, both the types of induction have concluded that scientific induction is always certain, but Mill compelled to admit, to accept us that we get certainty. That means both the induction accept that certainty out of probability. So in this regard, in this case, the principle of the uniformity of nature cannot be the result of induction also. This is the second. And the last one, that is an important criticism regarding the principle period of induction, 8. Already we have studied in first year also, empiricism and rationalism. So according to empiricism, do you know that we get knowledge through experience? And according to empiricism, knowledge is the source of, sense experience is the source of knowledge. So here we get knowledge through experience according to empiricism. And so we can't accept anything as presupposition. So the knowledge of the uniformity of nature cannot be exception. It must also be derived from experience. So again, as Mill was an empiricist philosopher, he was unable to admit the law of uniformity of nature as the ground of induction. So he has accepted this law as the result of unscientific induction. So here, this is the important characteristic, important criticism of paradox of induction, that is the last, third. The last one again we say, that is that we get knowledge through experience according to empiricism. So that means what we say, that means according to empiricism, sense experience is the source of knowledge. Already we have studied in first year course. Then here we cannot accept anything as presupposition. That means the knowledge of uniformity of nature cannot be exception. It must also be derived from experience. As Mill was an empiricist, philosopher, he was unable to admit, that means Mill is an empiricist, so he was unable to admit the law of uniformity of nature as the ground of induction. So he has accepted this law as the result of unscientific induction. So this criticism, and on the basis of this analysis, that is what is paradox of induction and criticism also, in conclusion we can say that in logic the law of uniformity of nature is a presupposition. That means law of uniformity of nature is presupposition. So we must accept this law, otherwise it will be impossible for us to generalize the induction. If we have not accepted this law in logic, it will be impossible to us to generalize or studies the induction. This law can never be the result of unscientific induction. In fact, this law is the ground of all induction. So, in conclusion, we can say that the law of uniformity of nature is a presupposition, and it will be, we must accept this law, because if this law is not accepted, it will be very much impossible for us, that is to generalize the induction or generalize the induction process. That means the ground of induction. This law can never be the result of induction. In fact, this law is the ground of induction. So, there are some criticism, and we have already discussed that what is paradox of induction, and criticism also. So, in these topics, one thing keep in mind that the ground of induction is the result, is the ground result is itself as a result of an induction. This is known as, that means we can establish a conclusion that the ground of induction is itself is an induction. This is known as the paradox of induction. Here the paradox points to be the inconsistencies involved in Mill's view that the ground of induction is itself is a result of induction. So, Mill holds the principle of the uniformity of nature is the result of induction by simple enumeration, or in other words, it is based on uncontradicted experience. So, this is the paradox of induction. So, this first, lastly we can say that this paradox of induction means a contradictory statement between regarding the principle of the uniformity of nature given by J.S. Mill. So, this is the paradox of induction, and in my next class we will discuss what is cause and what are the qualitative marks of cause. So, thank you everyone.